Mark Johnson is the chairman of Innosight, a strategic innovation consulting and investing firm that he co-founded with Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen. He's also the author of Seizing the White Space, Business Model Innovation for Growth and Renewal. Before he earned an MBA at Harvard, Mark was a nuclear-power-trained surface warfare officer in the U.S. Navy. So I think it's safe to say that he actually knows quite a bit about the best ways to seize space. Please welcome Mark Johnson.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you for staying and participating when the weather's so beautiful and you could be at the pool or playing golf or any of those other activities. So I hope I don't let you down. I wanted to speak to you about, first and foremost, giving you a common language and a common way to think about innovation and growth. Because I think that what we found in companies is that many have struggles with being able to make innovation real and new growth real because they speak different languages. They have different views about what innovation is all about. And because of that, the organization doesn't move as powerfully in the direction of transformation and renewal if they thought about how could we get this language of innovation and all the different kinds of innovations, including business model innovations, grounded in our organization. So if nothing else, I would hope in this next 30 minutes, before we move to Q&A, I could give you a little bit of this language of innovation and how it can be meaningful to create new growth. And I'd like to start off with a story. It's a well-known story in the sense of everybody knows the Apple iPod. But most people don't know the chronology that led to the Apple iPod, that there were a whole host of companies that had come up with MP3 players before the iPod completely transformed the music industry. Any of you early adopters out there that owned a Rio Diamond in 1998? Looks like we don't have any early adopters in this audience. Well, the Rio Diamond came out in 1998, and it could hold about 20 songs. And it was difficult to download your music, but it was a great value proposition in the sense that now we could customize our music. We didn't have to buy a CD to listen to the one song we wanted and throw out the other 9 songs we didn't. So Rio Diamond came out. There was another company in 2000 called Cabo. It improved the performance of the MP3 player. It could hold about 40 songs. It had a little bit more memory requirement, a little bit better functionality. Rio didn't like that, so they came out with the Rio Riot in 2002. And then everybody, of course, knows the Apple iPod in 2003. And then they, what we call, disrupted themselves with not as good an iPod in 2005 with the Apple Shuffle, but it was cheaper and it was portable, and they were building a portfolio of iPod products from the early days. Now, the reason I bring up this chronology is to ask the question, who's not? What consumer electronics company do you think should have had something to do with portable electronics and the transformation of the music industry that's not on this picture? Sony. Sony's nowhere to be found. And the question is why? Why would Sony, in one of the most important revolutions in the music industry, and more particular consumer electronics, not be anywhere on this picture? In fact, the founding of Sony, the whole reason that Sony is around is because of portability and taking advantage of transistor technologies and coming up with the first transistor radio and the portable televisions. Everything has been about portability, and Sony's nowhere to be found. I think I hear some of the answers. I think I heard music, and part of the problem is exactly that. What had Sony become? They'd become a music company. And as the MP3 player was coming online, CD shipments were coming up 25%. And it wasn't until after 2000, 2001 that the writing was on the wall, what was happening to the music industry as it related to CDs. And the reason is, for Sony, as much as they were a consumer electronics company, they had become a music company. They had artists, and they had music label, and they had a whole ecosystem that worked around the fact that they were as much a music company in their evolution as they were at a consumer electronics company. And in thinking about what had happened in their own rearview mirror, Sony executives said, I think we fell asleep for a while. Maybe part of the problem was we were affiliated with a music company. And it wasn't only executives who had an aversion to moving forward with this kind of technology and producing it for new growth. Engineers said, we don't like hard disk technology, it's not Sony. And the result of those kinds of quotes, as it relates to being able to create new growth and why it's so relevant to you in the world of finance as CFOs, is the fact that this story that I'm telling has nothing to do with really the failure to be creative and come up with new innovation. It's a resource allocation problem. Sony failed to allocate resources to create new growth because it was highly disruptive to their new and core business called music. And so one of the first things we need to think about when we try to encourage and venture out to create innovation for new growth is to recognize that oftentimes it has nothing to do with the process of creating innovation in terms of product development or creativity. It's really more about a resource allocation problem. This is the sad side of the story. Now, the happy side of the story, which again everybody knows kind of the end result of the transformation that happened with Apple that started with the iPod, but then it went to the iPhone 4 technology, to the iPad, and all of the evolution of platforms that moved Apple to go way beyond of its traditional roots in computers, is the iPod was what I call, the iPod was a business model innovation. See, if you think about Rio and Cabo and all these early adopters, why didn't they ever get traction like iPod? The reason is because the Rio and all these other companies were able to solve the problem of getting your music in a very convenient and customized form, but they weren't able to solve the problem that it was difficult to download it onto your MP3 player. Apple solved that problem with the iPod. And the way that they had to do it was not only to create a cool-looking device, but they had to integrate software with that device and a service in 2003 called Apple iTunes, iPod iTunes. And it was the combination of product and service and software integrated in the right way that led to not only the ability to customize music, but to have it conveniently downloaded onto your player. And by being able to make it convenient, you had consumer mass adoption. So it was this combination of all of those into what would be called a business model innovation that allowed Sony to do what those other companies before couldn't do. But the business model innovation doesn't end there. It was also interesting what they did in terms of their revenue model. Just like Gillette created the blades and razors model where they would give away the razor and make money on the razor blades, what Apple was doing to generate the kind of tremendous growth, exponential growth, with the iPod iTunes combination was to give away the iTunes. In fact, they lost money, and to make it up with the iPod. So they had the Gillette razors and razor blade model in reverse. And it was the combination now not only of the technological innovation, but the financial innovation integrated in a whole new way to operate and turn a profit that allowed Apple to do what they did that was something that the Rio and the Cabo couldn't do. Now, the final piece of this story that's interesting and demonstrates the importance of being able to integrate something in a whole different way is that when you account for the growth, $10 billion of Apple and iTunes revenue from 2001, the end of 2001, to where they ultimately ended up at the end of 2006 at $10 billion. Their market cap at the end of 2001 went from $1 billion to the end of 2006 and 2007 to over $150 billion. And you can't account for that kind of market realization just by what they contributed to new revenue growth. There was an expectation that got created because this was upside surprise.